Good afternoon, my name's Kevin Scarce. Thanks very much for joining us. In the next 20 to 25 minutes, I want to talk about who we are, what we're doing, what we intend to review, how we intend to review it, and also how you might be part of the process of providing the evidence that we need to answer the terms of reference that the government's given this Royal Commission. So, it's a good start. There we go. Clearly, before the process of establishing the Royal Commission, there was a community opportunity to contribute to the terms of reference. That was done through the Your Say website. We had about 1,000 submissions on what the terms of reference should encompass. The Royal Commission was established on the 19th of March. Our job was to look at the opportunity, the cost and the risk of South Australia participating in the fuel cycle, and I'll explain that in a minute, but in essence, mining, adding value processing, nuclear power generation and storage. Why a Royal Commission? Well, I think the first thing, it is a trusted process to gather evidence. It's trusted in the community. It is independent of government, so that once we have our terms of reference, the next time we'll talk to government about the terms of reference will be when the final report's complete on the 6th of May. And it is clearly evidence-based. The issues papers are our process of gathering that first tranche of data. So there are 4 issues papers, and I'll talk briefly about the issues papers, but they're the principal means of gathering information. And they cover, as you can see, the feasibility and viability of expanding the current exploration, extraction and milling activities. The value add. Can we participate in activities to transform uranium into a fuel source? And can we manufacture radioactive products, including medical radioisotopes? What is the potential for generating electricity from nuclear fuels? And the final, does it make sense to participate in the management, storage and disposal of waste? And when we look at those 4 fundamental questions, we look through a lens of opportunity and cost. Opportunity and cost in terms of the community, the environment and the economy. The first thing I say when we start these presentations is that the Royal Commission team, the ladies and gentlemen you see down the front here, have not a formed view on the answers to these questions. Our job is to gather the evidence to answer the questions in our terms of reference, and always through that prism of opportunity and cost to the environment, the community and the economy. So firstly, I need to briefly explain what I mean by the nuclear fuel cycle. The first part, clearly the part that we already participate in, is the mining of uranium. We have 2 current mines, the Olympic Dam and 4 Mile Mine. 4 Mile Mine is an in situ leaching activity. In essence, you go down to the ore body with a weak acid, dissolve it, bring the slurry back up, treat it, and uranium oxide is then formed. Olympic Dam is the other underground mining activity. It's crushed, brought to the surface, chemically treated, and just an indication of the sort of mining at the Limerick Dam on my left, and the Honeymoon processing facility on the right. The product is yellowcake, and that is currently transported overseas. So what's the opportunity to expand that current mining activity in South Australia? We should remember that Australia has about 30% of the known uranium deposits, and South Australia has about 80% of those national deposits. So it is an area of comparative advantage for the state to have that extent of uranium minerals here in the state. We're also tasked with looking at thorium. Thorium is also a potential fuel source. It's much more prevalent throughout the world. We do have resources here in South Australia. There are advantages of using thorium instead of uranium in terms of safety, mostly. And we're tasked with whether it makes sense to look at thorium deposits here in South Australia and whether that's a source of advantage for the state. The second part of the process is the adding value to the uranium oxide that we mine. There are three processes that we go through, and we go through these processes because you can't use the uranium that we mine as a suitable fuel source. You need to process it. There are a number of steps in that process, and really the purpose here is to show you the sort of infrastructure that you might require to do that. In the conversion process, we're talking about the conversion from an oxide to a gas, uranium hexafluoride. The second part of that process is enrichment. Again, you can't use the isotope that we use, uranium-235, in the percentage of concentration that's in the natural element. You need to enrich it from about 0.7% to about 3 to 4%. The process of enriching does that, and the final process is then converting that enriched uranium hexafluoride into fuel pellets, the sort of pellets that you see in the hand. 3 or 4 of those would probably provide enough fuel for a normal home for a year. Take the pellets, put them into rods of stainless steel from a zirconium alloy. You bring the rods together and you can see the fuel source here, which is the final product which goes in to power the reactor. So the process of conversion, fabrication, and enrichment talks about creating the fuel source that's used in the nuclear reactor. I also talked about what are the prospects of of manufacture. So here we're looking at potentially manufacturing medical and scientific radioisotopes. On my left is a picture of the Lucas Heights recently new opal reactor that's used for both scientific and medical purposes. It produces medical isotopes and generates capital by doing that, and those isotopes are then shipped around the world. It's currently providing about 10 to 15% of the world medical radioisotopes. There is another method of creating those through a cyclotron, and we have one of those in South Australia at the Samory facility, but none of those radioisotopes are exported. The third part of our terms of reference talk about the potential to generate electricity through nuclear generation. Commercially, these power plants have been operational since the 1950s, the 1960s. It's a simple process of generating power. You've got a nuclear fuel source. It heats the water under pressure, creates the steam, drives the turbine, creates the electricity, and then that loop feeds back again. There are about 390 odd nuclear reactors around the world at the moment, plus 43 in Japan that are not operating at the moment. Once the fuel source has been used over a period of 3 to 4 years, it starts to lose its energetic qualities. There are a process, which I'll talk about in a minute, of reprocessing that to re-energise the fuel source, or you might also take it to waste disposal, which is the next and the final element of the 4 terms of reference that we've got. The nuclear agency, atomic agency, classify waste in about 6 varieties, from the least hazardous to the most hazardous, which is clearly spent fuel. There are various means of managing that waste. The drum that you can see there contains low-level waste. It might be napkins or gloves from medical isotopes, papers as well. And then it generates up into what we would call low and intermediate level waste. And in general, that might be more radioactive elements involved in the process of generating electricity. In general, it's required to stabilise that before you store it. And the stabilisation processes, there are many of them. Vitrification is mixing the waste with sand, melting it, and then forming a waste encapsulated in glass. And then that is stored in steel containers, encased in concrete. There's also an Australian process called Synrock, where they use a similar process but with advanced ceramics to do the same thing. And that's currently being built at the Lucas Height facility in Sydney. Once the waste is stabilised, it then goes into the sort of storage that I've had here, which is a facility in Spain. You can see it's encased in concrete, encased in steel, and that's for intermediate level waste, a process that is used in that country. Where we have high level waste, we need more sophisticated management and storage of that waste because of the heat generating properties that it has. You can see on my left hand side water. What traditionally happens is once the fuel source has been finished as a fuel source, it's put into the wet storage pool for a number of years to essentially cool down. It's then encased in steel and concrete again, and you can see the storage, the temporary storage on the right hand side. The final storage of high level waste is deep geological storage. The example you have here is in Finland. where they're going to burrow down about 450 metres, and once the waste has been stabilised in one of those processes, it's then taken down and buried there, and it would be there for thousands of years. That site should be accepting its first waste in about 2022. There are some deep storage sites in the US for military waste, but this is the first site for commercial waste from power generation. And reprocessing, as I mentioned to you, there's an opportunity to re-energise the fuel source so that it can be used again in that cycle. And in that process, you're actually using more and more of the uranium. This is just an example of the UK, where you can see the sort of infrastructure and complexity of doing that particular process. So that's the nuclear fuel cycle, and if I can just go back, our job is to look at opportunity and cost in relation to the environment, the community and the economy of participating in all of those particular 4 elements of the nuclear fuel cycle. We're already in mining, and so the question in mining is, can we expand it? What are the opportunities? What are the costs? And then we go to each of the other elements of the cycle. The same questions are now being asked. Does it make sense for South Australia to participate in those elements of the nuclear fuel cycle? What are the risks? What are the costs? What might be the benefits? Our role in this Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission is to gather evidence on those particular questions. The questions you will see are being posed in the issues papers. Now, we have a small team ourselves of about 15, and we call upon world expertise in each of those areas. Both world expertise, our national expertise, our local expertise. We have just started this week looking at how we might model the financial frameworks and the social frameworks to answer the questions about what opportunity this might drive. So there's a level of expertise in each of these areas that we have access to. Because Australia does not participate in the majority of the fuel cycle, we'll have to go overseas where they do participate in these areas and gather information and expertise in those areas to bring back and inform the Commission. And I need to emphasise that on the Commission, the expert team, we have people who support the nuclear industry and those who do not support the nuclear industry. And when we go overseas to gather evidence, we're looking for those people who understand and support the continuation of these activities and those that don't, so that we get a balanced view and we report the evidence that we've seen and been presented with. Can I finish that? I'm happy to, and then I'll come back. What is the process? I talked about the issues papers. There are 4. They were released in April, May. 90 days. Each of the issues papers has a series of questions. We've attempted to take a very complex subject in the issues paper and explain what the processes are, and then asked a series of questions about the issues that will help us answer the terms of reference that we've been given. Once that completes in early August, we'll take those issues papers and all of the responses that we've received, and then we'll draw out the major differences in views and opinions in that process. We will then hold a series commencing in September, a series of open forums where we bring together the evidence in each of those 4 areas, with the public invited to attend, both here in Adelaide and regionally, and try and distill the differences and understand the submissions that we've been given. That process will be ongoing until probably early December. We will then take that away, develop our initial findings, and bring those initial findings back to the community in February for the community to make comment on those findings. We will then complete the final report at the end of the process. And that final report should be delivered in early May. So there are a number of steps in this process of engaging the community and presenting the evidence that we see. On our website, all of the issues papers are there. All of the submissions that we receive on each of the issues paper will be placed on the website. We will we'll have an activity level of where the Commission has gone, who they're seeing, and basically what subjects are being discussed. So we hope to have a very transparent process about where the Commission is going, what it's doing, and how it's going about their work. I think I've pretty much covered that, but the other point is that this is the start of the engagement process, not the end. And there are plenty of opportunities to participate through submissions, through live streaming of those activities in open forums. So they'll be streamed through the website by attending, should you desire to do so, in Adelaide and also in regional communities. The submissions guidelines are also on the website. They provide, I hope, a very practical way of defining how we would like those submissions so that we can get on and do our work of gathering the evidence that's needed. That's all I wanted to open with. Can I just reinforce the points that are important to the Commission? An open, transparent process to collect evidence on the issues that the Commission has been given as part of its terms of reference. At the end of this process, we will develop a report based upon the evidence that we've received to answer the questions. That will be given to government, and government will then decide how it will take those particular actions. I have no way of knowing what government will do with the report, although I have been certainly encouraged by the Premier saying that he will have it for discussion and debate. I'm happy to answer questions. Yes, sorry. Yeah, the website.
Excuse me.
Today.
The question,
Sorry, the question is who's for and against, and have their views been published? Is that pretty accurate? So on our website we will have each of our experts with their interests, their pecuniary interests, each of the staff of the Royal Commission with their interests as well. In direct answer to your question, our expert panel at the moment has Barry Brooke, who you would say is for Ian Lowe, who you would say is against. John Carson, who was an ex-head of the nuclear framework, so the organisation responsible for the safety of it. Leanne Reid, who's the chief scientist here in South Australia. And the final one is Tim Stone from the UK, and you'd say he's for. Well, you'll see it on the website. So all of those interests will be declared and quite transparent. So, sure. Thanks, Heath. This gentleman there.
Thank you. Have there been any similar inquiries in Australia, and if so, how much notice would you take of them?
Well, I might need to dive back to my team here, but Ziggy Sikowski did one, I think in 2006, around that time. We certainly read his report. There have been a number of other reports on parts of the cycle. We've read and received most of those. We've also looked overseas to see where reports have been taken to advise us. We're also, when we go overseas, the purpose of going overseas is to go and look at best practice and where it hasn't worked. So we hope to inform ourselves by going to Japan, for instance, to understand what went wrong, to look at the environment. We'll go to Finland, where we think best practice is in deep geological storage, particularly with how they've engaged with their community to do that. We'll go to France to look at the new technology to see how a nation that gets 75% of its electricity from nuclear sources manages that process. We'll go to England to look at their regulatory framework, which we think is very good, but we'll also go to areas in England where it hasn't worked, where there has been accidents, and we'll try and bring back that evidence to inform us, because the Commission has to look at safety aspects and all of those issues surrounding this particular industry. So we need to learn best and less perfect than perfect practice.
Thank you.
Now,
I'd like to know where are the locations where uranium is mined?
where?
Yes.
Uh,
I know of that. Up that way in the Northern Territory.
oh, in Ranger?
Yeah, they've got allocate coming down as well.
They do, but as I mentioned to you, Australia itself has about a bit less than 30% of the world's known resource, and South Australia has about 80% of that. We have, I think, 4 or 5 mines, and 2 are currently operational. Limerick Dam and 4 Mile, which is near Lebanon. So Honeymoon. Yeah.
And how is this going to be a waste as well? General waste. Right. Is this going to be a general waste for nuclear waste as well as a processing establishment?
We are asked to look at the disposal of nuclear waste, both low, high, medium level, and we have been asked to look at processing. So that's part of the terms of reference for the Commission.
Right, so where do you have proposed site? Where is the proposed site?
We are not required to propose any sites for this particular work. What we are focused on is asking the questions. That's not part of the questions. I do think what we would look at and publish is best practice in engaging the community in the process of how you might get there, but we are not required and certainly won't be talking about locations for any of those facilities in terms of processing, nuclear power generation or waste disposal.
Would you be needing artesian water?
I don't think so. You're talking about for nuclear power generation?
For processing, and also...
Oh, for processing?
Yeah, also, would there be any waste that would be deposited near the artesian basin?
Well, that's one of the very clear issues in terms of making a choice on site. Geological stability, water, artesian water, are critical issues that need to be taken into consideration. We'll identify those based upon best practice in the world.
Right, and just finally, and thank you for your time, is would there be an independent monitor to monitor the whole processing of various areas on a regular basis?
Yes. In Australia, the framework of safety is managed by the federal government. They have that responsibility. They have a separate organisation responsible for that. We would need to follow the guidelines established by the federal agency for that. And clearly, if we were to participate in those other elements that we don't at the moment, we would need to generate a new framework that would provide the sort of assurances that you're asking for. And that's part of our work, to identify what those frameworks would be, who's done it particularly well in the world, who hasn't.
Thank you.
Sir?
When we get to power generation, will you be looking at the feasibility simply of Australia generating its own power, or South Australia generating its own power, using uranium or thorium, perhaps our own, or perhaps with fuel rods brought in from somewhere else? Or will you be looking at the whole context of, is it a cost, benefits, advantage for us to generate using nuclear in comparison to coal, renewables, all the other options?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's certainly part of the more complex part of our business. The first thing we'll need to do is estimate the quantity of power that we might need to generate both now and into the future, and I'm thinking to 20 to 30 years. There's an evidence that our power usage has been going down since about 2009. We'll need to make an estimate of that. We'll also need to model all of the costs associated with each of the methods of generating that electricity. And we'll also need to understand how much baseload electricity must be delivered. So, yes, we will need to run a very complex model to try and estimate all of the costs of the various ways of generating the energy that we need for the future. One of those options would be nuclear. We will certainly be looking at renewable energies to see whether they're capable of producing the sort of load that we'll need. We'll also need to estimate what the cost of generating that might be. That would be the only way that you could come to a conclusion that nuclear power would make economic sense for the state.
And would this just refer to South Australia, or would it be Australia-wide?
No, we do appreciate that we're part of a national energy network, but we're looking at generating the power that South Australia needs, not anything broader than that. Sir?
I clearly understand.
Can I just ask? Thanks.
I clearly understand the focus on costs. What I really want to know is the benefits to be also involved, because quite frankly, the steps of adding value on all phases of the exercise, the process that you said, is extremely costly, but at the same time we have opportunity which we've not had before, and I want to know whether that's also included in your report.
yes, we would need to make an evaluation and state the assumptions upon which our evaluation is made about the benefit, the financial benefit, jobs benefit of participating in each element of that cycle. We would also need to look at the social benefits of doing that. So both of those need to be modelled. Now that we've completed the issues paper, that's the next tranche of work for us to get together and understand the modelling that's required to provide the answers to the questions that go to the heart of the value and the benefit of doing that. Also, we think there's a lot of information that we'll need to drag in from overseas because we don't participate in that. And that is another purpose of going overseas, to gather the data, to populate the model, and then to run the various sensitivity analysis that you'll need to mirror the environment that we may be in, both now and 10, 15, 20 years' time.
Thank you.
Sir?
Thank you. I've heard various accounts of how one might make a submission and the extent to which submissions are able to be confidential and or open to freedom from information. And I wonder if you could clarify both of those things, please.
Okay. We are encouraging all of the submissions to be open. The reason for that is because it enables us to put them on the website, and it enables the entire community to follow what the responses to our questions have been. We do know from our trip up north that some Aboriginal communities do not want to disclose some of the issues of culture and land on a website. And so we would certainly provide dispensation for those communities. I also expect that there'll be some commercial issues that some of the companies would not want to disclose. And I think we would certainly be looking at that positively. We'd be indicating where submissions or parts of submissions were confidential. So we are encouraging people to put in submissions that can be placed on the web, that can be reviewed, that are transparent. I'm also cognizant of the fact that for some reasons there might be a need for commercial or cultural issues.
Would the submissions that remain confidential be listed so that people were aware that those submissions existed and the reasons for which they were kept confidential?
I would think so. I look to my legal team and see whether I'm treading on thin ice, but from my perspective, if you're going to be transparent, I would want to say that this Aboriginal community didn't want this published, this company did not want this particular aspect of their submission published. But if there isn't a good reason to have something confidential, then I'm not of the mind to accept it as a submission.
And I did hear that submissions would need to be accompanied by, witnessed by a JP, that there was a quite complex process.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a complex process. What we've asked is we want to collect evidence. And what I want to be assured of is that when submissions are put in, that it is the evidence to the best of the knowledge of the person putting it in. And because when we take oral evidence, we'll be swearing people in that process, it seems to me to be logical to ask for the same standard for written. Now, there are more than 5,000 JPs in South Australia. I know that we will have a problem with some of the Aboriginal communities in the north, and we're in the process now of fixing that problem by bringing more people on staff that will enable us to have a much more permanent presence in those regional communities that might not have access to the web and other sources of information. So I think that was one of the very early lessons we got from our trip up north. We need to put more resource out there. We'll certainly consider whether it's important to translate into language. I mean, I've had advice both ways, but as best we can, our goal is to make sure that we're collecting evidence, and we need to distinguish our process from the political process that happens after this, where the views of the community are going to be engaged in making the final decision. You know, we'll put a report, it'll be up to government to decide how they manage that. It's not that we're going to be ignoring community views where they're relevant to the issues, and some of the issues aren't quantifiable. We'll be certainly putting that in, but the thrust of what we've got to do, the thrust of why it's a Royal Commission, is to provide the evidence on the questions that we've asked, and that's the reason for the process.
Thanks, Phil. There just might be a little bit of confusion because on the Have Your Say website, which saw submissions about the terms of reference, there is still a clause which says if you want to make submissions on the issues, you can do it on this website, and that's the Attorney General's office address, and people could quite easily go to that and think they can just put in the submission that way, and if that's going to get sent back to them, that's not going to generate a good environment for the process. So that might be good to be clarified on that particular website, that you can't do it that way.
Thank you for that. I was not aware of it, and that needs to be clarified. Can I say, right from the outset, that the Your Say website has absolutely nothing to do with our Royal Commission. That was a process established for the terms of reference. We are independent from government. We are not seeking the views of government, although we would seek specific advice on those things that the government managed, like EPA, those sorts of issues. The government is not making, to the best of my knowledge, any submission in relation to the terms of reference. That's our responsibility to report back to them. But we'll clarify the Your Say website. Thank you. Oh, sorry, can I go to the back to the lady up there? I'll come back.
Thank you. I've got two questions actually. One is a little bit about your approach, and the other one is a little bit political. For the approach, for the cost consideration, I wonder how realistic you are going to be. Because one of the issues that you've raised in your presentation was the need for concrete, for example. So concrete production is one of the greatest contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. So for considering whether nuclear is a cleaner alternative, are you going to take all of the costs for the entire cycle, for transport?
Yes.
Okay, so you are looking at it
For every method of generating power, including remediating the environment for what we're doing at the moment. Now, that's our goal. We'll make some assumptions. The assumptions will be clearly marked when we produce our reports. So they'll be up for scrutiny. And the second question?
Yeah, the second one, I have to say, I really welcome that Australia is embarking in this discussion. What confuses me is that Australia is also, as a nation, partner or participant in the international framework for nuclear energy cooperation. And I just can't piece it together how this Royal Commission is sitting in that context. So I wonder whether you can clarify that.
Are you...
That framework sets out that Australia, with the other partner nations in it, is also looking at issues of waste and reprocessing and all of that. So I just wonder how this work of the Commission is going to inform or guide Australia's future participation in that framework.
I wouldn't be that presumptuous to suggest that I'm going to guide the Australian framework. But I think your point is well taken in terms of understanding the responsibilities for the safe work frameworks that are established. That is a national responsibility. We are working with the federal government and the agencies in the federal government to advise us about the processes that they have in undertaking those safety and regulatory regimes. So we are very mindful of the fact that whatever we do will need to be approved by the federal government, and also mindful of the fact that we'll need to go to the IAEA and understand the international, the global network, and how we participate in that. So one of our visits will be to Vienna for a day to understand exactly how that's going to work, and then make recommendations. But I have to say, they are recommendations to the federal government, and then we need to manage that double hurdle of the state government and also the support of the federal government, because it won't happen without that support, even should we decide to go down that path. So, we'll just bring the microphone. They're very clear to me, but maybe at the back. Yep.
Obviously, there are many stages of the disclosure. How often do you reckon on coming out with some sort of a newspaper or a bulletin of what's happened to bring us all up to date? Because at the moment we're all hanging on internet things and all the rest of it, and we don't know who's got what.
Well, the primary source of information for the Royal Commission will be the website. On that website, you'll have the issues papers, you'll have the individual responses to each of the issues papers, you'll have the process that we're going through, you'll have the conflicts of interest, pecuniary interests of the staff members and experts, you'll have a blog for younger people. You'll also have a list of where the Commission's been, who they've talked to, and in essence, the major subjects of what's being discussed.
You've got to stretch the canvas pretty wide, don't you?
Yes, it is a big piece of work.
Are you aware that Honeymoon had pulled the plug in the last week or so?
I'm aware that we only have 4 Mile and Roxby at the moment.
That's a delicate way of putting it. They have suspended.
Sorry, there's a lady in the back.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, in the process of researching the impacts of uranium mining, which I believe is necessary for the consideration of the expansion of the industry, will the Royal Commission have access to the documents held by BHP Billiton under their confidentiality clause in the Indenture Act, which exempts the company from the Freedom of Information Act?
We will be seeking to understand the economics of expanding the industry. So there is certain information available from the state government, and clearly there's information from BHP. We will be encouraging BHP to join us so that we understand the economics of the various decisions that are made. Those discussions have just started, and I'm not sure where they're going to go, but I think we will be very encouraged if BHP comes forward to give us the information that we need to make that assessment.
But does the Royal Commission have any powers to, coerce BHP into releasing documents that they hold in secret about the Olympic Dam mine?
I'm going to stop there. I'm not a lawyer, but I would hope to encourage them to participate, and if they don't, then I'd look at our other options. I'm not there yet. I don't want to bring out a big waddy when I don't need to.
Sure, I'm just wondering what
they've been helpful at the moment. I hope that we'll get the information that we need to answer the questions. I don't need to go any further than the questions that I've been asked in the terms of reference.
Sure, I understand that. But does the Commission have those powers, whether they choose to use them or not?
I would say yes, we have the powers. It's a question of whether we get the information that we need to answer the question, not to go any broader.
Thanks.
That's a non-lawyer saying that. So I notice my legal team are looking away at the moment, so I'll probably need to go and have another discussion.
Maybe one of your lawyers can answer the question.
They're not showing me any inclination so to do, so that might tell you something.
Thank you. I've got one more quick question.
Sure.
Given that the Aboriginal communities around Australia have been disproportionately affected by the uranium mining industry so far in this country, why are there no Aboriginal people appointed to the Commission?
Well, that's a good question. We've certainly thought about it. The challenge we've had is finding an individual or individuals who represent the Aboriginal community as a whole, and we have not been able to do that. So the approach, well, you might turn up your face, but we've tried. So the approach that we're taking, because it is an issue, an important issue, and we need to learn from what has been done in the past, and I'm thinking particularly of Marilyn, we will have someone in those communities on a very, very regular basis. We've spoken to the communities at Yalata and Oak Ridge. I know that they're going to put in a submission talking about what didn't happen properly in those early days. And they'll make submissions about the terms of reference, and we will certainly be out there assisting them to do that. It is an important issue, but I simply haven't been able to find anybody who's been prepared to put up their hand to talk for the Aboriginal community. They prefer to talk as communities rather than centralising any advice, and that's pretty consistent with what I've seen 7 years ago.
Thanks, I acknowledge that, but I guess an Aboriginal person on the Commission may have just added another perspective, because I assume that the Royal Commission that has been appointed also does not represent all of white Australia.
Gentlemen here, and there's one behind.
So I'm pleased that you mentioned thorium as one of the assets we may have to mine up. Thorium is also found with the so-called rare earth minerals, which have significant economic value and use in electronics and other industries. Is that something that you'll be adding into the equation for value?
Yes, yes. We're looking at all those industries that are associated with the cycle to see whether they might be a particular prospect for the state. So thorium would be part of that.
Thorium also generates, or makes me think of the molten salt reactor, the liquid fuel as opposed to fuel rod-based reactors, a class of them. And these are due, I understand, around, or beginning around 2022, at least from Canada, which also has a good regulatory framework to consider. Now, since we don't have more than the early experiments, successful as they were, from Oak Ridge National Laboratories, can you still incorporate models of these very promising and much lower cost, smaller molten salt reactors in your cost analysis based on future projections of their economic, well, their reduced costs?
In terms of the molten reactors, I understand China and India are very advanced, but I've been reading papers going back to 2002 saying that they're very advanced. But your point, are we looking at future technology? Yes.
This particular liquid fuel
Yes.
class of future technologies is right around the corner. If we buy into something with fuel rods, we're putting ourselves in a handcuff, I think.
We're not looking at any particular piece of technology. We will be looking at all of the promising technologies, but with a very focused mind on the promises of the past. So, but I appreciate your question. Are we looking at modern technology? The answer is certainly yes. We're looking at the Generation 4 reactors. You know, it's a minefield to try and estimate when commercially they might be available.
And my last question is the fact that there are designs, either from MIT and some others, for multi-cell reactors that will be able to use the 99%
Yes.
fuel that's in the so-called spent nuclear fuel rods as fuel for their own purposes. Is that something we're considering or would do?
We are certainly taking advice on that from our expert panel. We will be going overseas to look at where they're working on these new Generation 4 reactors which have these claims about being able to use enormous amounts of the uranium as opposed to what we currently use, which reduces the waste. But again, we've got to... No. We must look at that to see, because we're looking at 20 to 30 years ahead. No, I'm talking about us as a state, if we started. Yeah. So, and then there's the lady behind.
To some degree, this follows on from what's just been spoken. Is it within your scope to differentiate between, and perhaps even recommend, the use of, let's say, thorium rather than uranium to be used as the primary fuel source if we get to that fuel business?
Absolutely. I mean, we'd be given a very wide remit. Firstly, we would need to prove that it's safe. Secondly, we would need to prove that it's economically viable. Thirdly, we would need to prove that that technology is on the immediate horizon. But all of those issues will be addressed when we look at power generation and the various means of generating the power. And I think, taking this gentleman's point, if the underlying power requirement continues to reduce, there are smaller 500 megawatt, 200 megawatt nuclear power reactors coming on the market now. Whether it makes economic sense is something we'll need to look at.
Thank you.
My understanding of the nuclear cycle is it's extraordinarily expensive. So it's extremely expensive to create a reactor. This might last for 20 to 25 years, and then it's extremely expensive to decommission it, if that's even possible. Can you tell me, for instance, how much it is for these deep geological waste disposals? What's the cost?
It's in the billions of dollars.
In the billions of dollars.
Yep, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's what I suspected. Extremely expensive process. Why, in a country like Australia, are we putting this sort of time and energy into renewables where we're in a position we can do that, as opposed to Japan and France and so on? This is a lot more difficult. In Australia, we're really in a much better position to investigate renewables. I'm sure even this commission that you're organising is probably quite expensive as a first starting point for this process. I don't quite understand why so much time and money is put aside to spend on this process, and it will just remain to be an even greater expense.
Well, they're the questions that we've been asked to answer. What is the cost? What is the benefit of participating in parts of the nuclear fuel cycle? I don't think anybody in our team is walking away from the expense. What we need to marry that with, or what are the opportunities? Why are we doing this? I mean, I think we're doing this because we have a comparative advantage in South Australia of having a fuel source here of perhaps 20% of the world's supply, known supply.
But we also have sunlight and wind and
We do.
other things that we can investigate.
Well, all I can say there is We will model the demand, and we'll model how best and most cost effectively to deliver that demand. And there's lots of questions about whether renewables can provide the base load. I'm told that they can, and I've encouraged people to give us submissions about that. But all your questions are valid. They need to be answered as part of the terms of reference. Gentleman on the back.
Hello, Commissioner. I'm not following you personally, I'm just particularly interested in this process. My question to you is there any possibility of this Royal Commission actually returning a negative result? And in the case that might happen, how can the Royal Commission justify the expense incurred of the undertaking of the Commission?
Well, I have no idea what the outcome might be. I think it's a question we need to ask ourselves. The investment in asking the question, whichever way it goes, I think is worthwhile for our future. So I can certainly justify the expense of doing this Royal Commission, and I can assure you that if the evidence doesn't stack up, then there won't be a recommendation from us supporting something that we don't believe.
In that case, have you done a little bit of a risk assessment there and considered how you might broker that news to the South Australian public?
I hope to share that information over the next year so that the public can see the evidence as we present it and pass the information. I hope the process that we undertake informs the public about the issues and about the evidence that's available, whatever the outcome might be. Now, there's a lady that hasn't asked the question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just following on from that other gentleman's question, I've made the assumption that South Australian ratepayers are paying for the Royal Commission. Could you just confirm that? My question that I wish to ask you, given you talked about the veracity of the information that you're collecting from overseas and I guess garnering evidence, would you be able to comment on some of the complexities that you think you might come by when you're overseas from a political standpoint, a commercial standpoint and a scientific standpoint? How are you, some of the complexities that may occur in sifting through that various information and people's slant on that information?
Yeah, that's an excellent question that I wish you hadn't asked.
Oh, well, I can go to tennis now, it's tennis night.
Look, these are incredibly complex issues. The world has been dealing with the detail for a long time. And there will be, we will visit companies that would like to sell us their plants. We are going to understand the complexity of the process, how they went about it, the costs, the risks. There's no other way for us to do that. In terms of the politics, I don't think there's much of an issue at this stage. I've talked with the Leader of the Opposition here. He supports the inquiry. I've spoken to Mark Parnell.
There's many more overseas, Mr. Scarce, there's many more overseas politically.
Well, we will talk to governments, clearly. I want to talk to the Japanese government responsible for the regulatory framework. I want to understand what happened. I want to talk to the English government about when it didn't work there. I want to talk to French officials. I want to talk to the IAEA. I haven't done any of that yet, and that's an experience that we'll start with next week. Guiding us in this process are some very wise, informed individuals who spend a lifetime and in these processes. One of the most encouraging things that I've seen in our month and a half to date is how these 5 experts with very disparate views have been able to synthesise the dialogue to form a team to critique the issues papers that we've got. So we've got a lot of expertise there. We've got a lot of expertise in Australia in specific areas of the nuclear industry. We'll use that. I'd like to leave a legacy of knowledge here in the state by using our resources and having that information. We'll engage with university students to assist postdocs, to assist us do some of the evaluation. So the politics, I'm not exactly sure how that will play out. I am sure people will try and sell us stuff. That's to be expected. I want the information, so that's a part of the process that we need to go through. In Australia, we'll just have to wait and see. Sorry, there's a lady here, and then a gentleman there.
How would the yellow cake be transported to the site that you select? When I was up in the Northern Territory, I saw coming from the uranium mines, there were 6 covered lorries, well 5 of them wasn't, and there was one that wasn't, that was number 5. And they were passing us on the highway, all covered, and I thought, well, I wonder what the contents are. And then the next thing, there's this yellow stuff going over the cars and all the rest of it. Yeah. And I sort of wonder, how is the waste from maybe Lucas Heights or other areas, which may go here to be processed, how is this going to be transported? Will it be by rail or will it be on public roads?
The first part of the question.
Just incidentally, when I was living in England for a while, at Dungeness down there in Kent, there was a leakage discovered there where their wastage had been going out. It's either in the river or the river near the sea. So
I'll take the first part of the question. There's national regulations for transportation, and I think you saw the yellow cake drums as one of those slides. Sorry? In one of the slides I showed you the yellow cake and there were the drums. It's my belief that they're transported by road from the sites north into Port Adelaide where they're sent on from a ship. I have to say the background radiation from the oxide itself isn't dangerous, and that's the reason that the framework allows you to do that with some additional safety requirements. That's mandated by the federal government, I think, rather than the state government. Why? In terms of the waste to Lucas Heights, there's a separate process underway with the federal government deciding on, at this stage, a number of sites that have been volunteered for medium to low level waste. That process is quite separate from us, but it's underway at the moment, and it's my understanding that they'll nominate the sites in the next couple of months for individuals and communities that have volunteered to be a disposal site for low and intermediate waste. There's an enormous process that goes behind that, but that's not part of what we're looking at. And finally, we will look at those areas where processes and safeguards have failed. That's the purpose of going to Fukushima. That's the purpose of going to Sellafield, to understand when things go wrong, why they go wrong, and bring that back to our discussions and presentation of information.
I was just thinking of accidents on the road where, they carry this
I've got some experts at the back, but it's my understanding that the material itself, when it comes out of Honeymoon or it comes out of Olympic Dam, isn't a danger.
we could have 2 radioactive waste dump sites if they don't go ahead with Radium Hill. What are they going to do with that waste that's already at Radium Hill?
We're going to Radium Hill. I don't, to obviously have a look at it. We've been to Port Perry to see what the impact of some of the tailing dams have done there. But I'm not aware of what's at Radium Hill at the moment. So that's something I'll need to be advised about. But is someone in the team?
Radium Hill has a licence. It's under the Radiation Protection Act in South Australia. We have a number of licensed low-level repositories in South Australia. I think that the estimated number is around 80. They are a variety of locations where radioactive waste, low-level radioactive waste is stored. They include sites in Adelaide, and they include other sites in the state. My understanding of myself, I don't precisely understand the types of the kinds of waste that are stored at Radium Hill. Radium Hill was originally South Australia's first uranium mine, but it is licensed under the Radiation Protection Act as a low-level radioactive waste site. So it's one of that number of sites that currently operates in the state. I don't understand this process to involve in answering the question about whether we move the waste from that site. But that's, I think, the basic information with respect to the fact that that is a licensed site for low-level waste. Hope it helps.
Sorry? Yes, the gentleman.
Just a point of clarification about yellow dust flying around. When I worked on the Roxby processing plant, I was told that uranium oxide is white, uranium carbonate, which may contain small amounts of sulphur, is yellow, but it is not a deep yellow. So any yellow dust flying around cannot have been uranium oxide.
Okay, I'm learning. Sir.
Thank you. I wondered if you would be kind enough to put up the diagram of the nuclear fuel system that you used before, Commissioner. This may appear as though I'm trying to be clever, but I have been a teacher for a long time, and I think the language that we use is extraordinarily important because it dictates our worldview and all the ideas we have in that worldview. That's a bit general, but you get the idea. And I think that to say that you are in a Royal Commission about the nuclear fuel cycle, when the reprocessing section of that diagram, which would make it a cycle, is relatively minimal, is in fact something of a scam. And it is as a major inaccuracy. The nuclear fuel industry is by and large, not totally, I acknowledge, but by and large a one-way process. It is not cyclic, and to continue to use that term when that term for most of the public is a term of relaxation, everything's okay. If you ask people what they're doing about the environment, their first response will be, I'm recycling things. So there's a kind of almost godlike aura around the notion of recycling. And that's just not accurate in the nuclear industry, and I wonder what your commission is going to do about that.
Well, we've taken this diagram from international diagrams around the world. Yeah. If you're suggesting that not much of the fuel waste is recyclable, reprocessed, then I don't disagree with you. But I would say that in terms of what we're trying to achieve here we're not trying to make it sound better than it is. We're not trying to gild the lily. But I am saying that reprocessing is part of the cycle. I hope you're right, sir. is part of the cycle, and there is reprocessing. There's a technology involved with that, and we want to look at it. So that's why it's in part of our process. Whether it makes sense to do it in South Australia is another issue, but it is there. There are countries that reprocess. We're going to look at it.
I'm aware of all that. I'm just making the point that the industry is not essentially recycling, and the name of your commission suggests that it is.
Okay, point taken. And it's something that if you wish to put a submission, we'd be very happy to receive it. Are there any other questions? Oh, there's one down the back.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just a slight definition, that's about the social impacts aspects of in terms of reference. Wondering where your thinking is up to at this stage about what social factors you'll be considering and where your thinking is up to about how they might be modelled. Thanks.
That's a very good question. I think we're into day 4 or 5. Ashok is leading the modelling process. It'd be fair to say at this stage that we have some models in mind in terms of how we might look at those benefits, social benefits to the community as a broad brush South Australian approach, looking at how opportunity would go to various communities as part of that process. We will declare our models, I expect, in the next couple of months, which is the time it's taken for us to get a suite of models to cover the whole of the, cycle. So that'll become apparent then, but it is very early days for us. We've been to ANU to look at some modelling, and that'll become more apparent in the next couple of weeks, I expect. But it's a bit early for us to be definitive on what aspects we're going to model and how we're going to do it. We do appreciate the importance of it, and that's why we're going to conduct it. Yep.
Climate change is big.
Just want to wait for the set, please.
So climate change is important everywhere, and we're doing pretty well in South Australia, I understand, but we have a long way to go in South Australia, even in Australia. Would you be able to find value that fits into a model or comes out of a model from the increase in Australia's reputation if in fact we do embrace nuclear, as opposed to being a place where it's unlawful at the moment to actually use nuclear energy, which is something I learned about in the past couple of months, which is quite frankly embarrassing to me, probably embarrassing to others that have done their mathematics about renewables versus nuclear in terms of energy density, for instance. But can you possibly see climate change advantages from this that can actually translate into value in at least one or some of the possibly social, possibly other models that might arise?
I think it would be incredibly difficult to quantify that.
True, but
qualitatively.
What socially, I don't get what social means. Social.
We're looking at the benefits of the community, the social aspects, the benefit, or the non-benefits to the community participating in this process.
So less pollution from
Yes.
Augusta and wherever else we generate.
We were certainly,
fossil fuels.
we're certainly looking at the cost of remediating the damage we're doing, and we want to model that as part of estimating the cost of generating electricity.
One other question briefly. Is there any chance that we might be able to arrange a referendum, as happened in Sweden years ago, perhaps other places as well, for all of South Australia to say, well, yes, no, or maybe later, or maybe, who knows? That's my question.
Well, of course you'll get an answer. That's a political process, that's a political decision, that's not the terms of reference for the Commission, and that'll be a process after we conclude. There's a gentleman there, and I need to call it quits in a minute, and the lady at the back, I think, has got a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick one relating to competition and if you are able to suggest that your commission can suggest that yes, it'll be a problem, it'll be a goer, right? We have, of course, a number of large organisations in Australia which are actually competing against generation of power and all that sort of thing, right? How then do you have them, if we are going to have a nuclear company and industry and do it, right, then there is a way of using that power of all those companies to generate private money, investment, etc., to take similar type of a threat off their books by suggesting that they be partners or whatever in such a program with the government. Could you consider that at some stage? Don't talk to me about it now, I'm just throwing it across the table.
Yeah, I mean, part of what we're trying to do is evaluate the impacts on other sectors of the community of having a nuclear industry. And so that's
at some stage, and that's going to be a problem.
I need to answer the terms of reference. That's going to be my focus. And we'll identify where we see problems in the answers we give to the terms of reference that helps whatever that next stage might be.
That's the last question, guys. You want to get to what?
We'll do both.
Last two.
Please.
Thank you. You touched on this before, but I was at a meeting in Port Augusta on the weekend, and the message coming from the community, which was attended by representatives from Aboriginal communities from around the state, was a very serious concern about the JP issue in remote communities. So I guess, given that you did talk about it a bit before, my question is just, it sounds fantastic if the Royal Commission is going to expand into remote communities, but I assume that won't be every community, and will a more practical and perhaps more culturally appropriate process be considered for those communities where the Royal Commission won't be stationed?
Yes. It's not that I think asking people to swear on oath that their submissions are their own and accurate to the best of their knowledge is onerous. But I do take your point that particularly in some of the Aboriginal communities, we are going to have to be much more flexible in doing that, and we will. And we'll be flexible with the remainder of the community. But what I'm trying to prevent is being cascaded with 500 similar submissions that takes away the time of the Commission by examining them all to find out they've come from one source. You know, we don't have the time for that. I want people to give us their evidence, to swear that it is their evidence, and really I'm asking for the same things that if they come up and give oral evidence, I'll be asking the same questions. And if that becomes incredibly burdensome for sectors of the community, then we'll fix it for those sectors of the community. But for the vast majority, with more than 5,000 JPs, and we'll help on the website identifying where they are in those processes, and if people have trouble, we'll also encourage them to come and talk to us, because we do want the broadest possible range of comment, of evidence about the questions that we've asked.